Let's now bring political analyst Fikile Vilakazi to unpack the late Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi's contribution to South Africa's politics and the life of the man himself. Thank you so much for your time. Many have described the true legacy of Prince Buthelezi as a difficult and complex one. Just take us through, especially from the political side of things, how his legacy will be defined.
Good afternoon, Unati, and to viewers at home. Thank you so much for inviting us. Mangosuthu, the Prince, the late, may his soul rest in peace. He's a man of many faces. If you look at him from the political perspective, as you can see, the people of Ulundi, he is a leader that has really committed himself into leading the people of KwaZulu-Natal. He has committed himself to standing for his bloodline, as we know that he is a descendant of the kingdom Zulu, really from the direct bloodline of Inkosi Bushaka. And he emerges into the political realm from that place. And his finding in Nkatha really becomes that place of destiny for him in the political sphere, because he saw himself as being appointed by the board and goddesses of Amazulu through his lineage in the kingdom. And then he finds himself in a position in South Africa during the transition period, where he is one of the few influential leaders that do not go to exile, as the ANC is banned from operating in the country and is set to operate underground. And he then has this responsibility to mobilize internally in the country, mainly because he is not really directly touched by the politics of banning of the liberation organizations like the ANC. So he sees that role for himself, and he speaks about this in his time, and in a manner that has led the people of KwaZulu-Natal that he has been destined for this. So he comes into the world of politics also highly influenced by his role as the chief of the Buthelezi clan, but also influenced by his birth role of being Umntwana wakwaPhindangene, being really the prime minister that led and has served the various kings of Amazulu from the descendants of Inkosi uDinuzulu. So he's that kind of a person, and he commits his life then to the service of the people of Amazulu. Much, of course, to the detriment of his political career, as we've seen in the story that has been unfolding around how that emanated into disagreements between him and the African National Congress in 1979, when they went to negotiate in London. And I think that sets him apart in the political conversation about where then the country is supposed to be going to.
All right, let's continue then with our conversation. We are in conversation with Fikile Vilakazi, political analyst there for us. As you're unpacking, the legacy and the times of Prince Buthelezi, there's obviously also the concern about the complexity that does talk very harshly about what others remember, the life and times of Prince Buthelezi to mean for them. On the one hand, we have some criticizing him very harshly, criticizing his character, that he leaves a murderous legacy, one where he was instrumental in waging a reign of terror on fellow black people. And that's something that cannot be ignored, going far back as calling him an apartheid collaborator. While on the other hand, as we've heard in the memorial service, many lauding him, saying he played a pivotal role in South Africa's transition to democracy, a history that cannot be denied. Now, as we further analyze this life, how do we then reconcile with these many faces, as you have said, now that he has passed?
It is very, very hard to imagine how that process of reconciliation can happen, given the pain and the depth of woundedness that has resulted from exactly what you have just outlined, because he is one of the people that is part of that conversation. But at the same time, I think that it is a conversation whose time has arrived. In that equation, he doesn't become just the only symbol of reconciliation that is needed for the country. He leaves that responsibility with the ANC. Remember, we are talking here about the People's War, which is a war that was between Inkatha Freedom Party and the African National Congress. And he demises at the time really of a process of negotiation. And how we do that as a nation is really something that some of us have been imagining, Unati, as the need to enter into a second phase of our truth and reconciliation conversation as a country, because the first phase was that of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I think, as you have heard, many of us who are talking on the public domain and are engaging on this issue would have mentioned that the first phase did not really take us to a place where we would have imagined us going to in terms of the project of reconciliation and healing as a nation, mainly because it negated these very aspects of the conversation that we are talking about today, whose passing of Umdana or Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi is brought into surface, right? So it is calling us then to say there is something that is missing, and that thing is about reconciling between IFP and the ANC, but also it is about reconciliation of the body politic of what was called the liberation movement at that time. And this is something that Usupra Mahumapilu writes about as the ANC was emerging to the policy conference not so long ago, where he is actually saying to the ANC, one of the strategies that we may need to think about is how to reunite the voices of the black political parties, black-led political parties, in the formulation of this imagination that we're calling reconciliation and healing for South Africa. And I think in the policy debate of the ANC, that conversation fell off the table. But that is exactly what then the passing of Prince Mangosuthu brings us back into. How does the reconciliation project look like in the second phase? And my assertion of it is that it looks like what people like the poet Ulevo Mashile talks about in her poetry when she says that South Africa, we do not have a name. South Africa, we need a conversation that involves all of us, where we each tell our story of how the transitioning into democracy has wounded us. And this is a conversation that cannot exclude any one of us, because the perpetrator and the oppressed both exist, right? And it's calling us to do that. But before we even get into that conversation that includes people of all races and people of all different diversities that we are at the center of the reconciliation and healing, we have a responsibility of bringing back the missing conversation about the black pain. And this is something I always allude to, Unat, to say, let us go. We need a national conversation of some sort that talks to that.
Have that, but let's pause for now because I think it's very important. Simpiwe, let's go now to Simpiwe. I believe that he is ready for us. Simpiwe was stationed outside the mortuary in Ulundi, where the body of Prince Buthelezi is currently being held. Simpiwe, can you hear me now? Just talk to us about what the latest is.
Well, Unati, as I speak to you, I'm seeing the Treasurer General of the IFP, that's Mr. Naren Singh, who has also arrived here at the Ulundi mortuary, where the body of the IFP founder and President Emeritus Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has been kept and is expected to be making its way to his home in Mahlabathini. The journey is about 10 kilometers from where we are, Unati. The hundreds of IFP supporters who have gathered here as well as Amabutho have been waiting, in earnest, some of them chanting slogans and singing songs in honor of the former IFP founder and President Emeritus Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Of course, the gathering cannot be complete without the involvement of Amabutho. Of course, we know that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has been the AmaZulu traditional prime minister for about 7 decades, and we have been speaking to those who have gathered here, the Amabutho, the Zulu regiments, who say that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has played an integral part in actually uniting the AmaZulu nation and also ensuring the preservation of the AmaZulu culture. Many of them, Unati, who have been, visiting the family, have been echoing those sentiments, saying that it's going to be difficult to find a replacement for Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. And you can imagine, having served the about 3 kings of the AmaZulu nation, the wealth of knowledge that he was able, to impart on other young isiZulu speakers. And as I speak to you, Unati, the hundreds of IFP supporters who had gathered here, some of them arrived as early as 12 o'clock. They are still waiting, for the family to finalize all that needs to be finalized in order for the body to start making its way to the home of the former IFP founder, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. But nonetheless, the mood here is that of excitement. The mood is that of jubilation, because those who have gathered here, Unati, say they are here to celebrate, but not to mourn, the life of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Any minute from now, Unati, we are expecting that body to be leaving the mortuary and making its way to the home of the former IFP founder and President Emeritus, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi.
It looks like, Simpiwe, that it is filling up pretty fast from the last time that we spoke to you. Just talk to us about the security around that mortuary as we speak at the moment, because earlier on we obviously heard that the mortuary itself is empty and that the body of Prince Buthelezi is the only one that is currently there, and it will then be escorted by Amabutho. It will be a 10-kilometer journey. What are security and just other law enforcement authorities saying? Are they comfortable as things stand at this stage?
Indeed, Unati, the statement that was issued by Nets Joint earlier this morning says that security has indeed been heightened, and as you drive around the Ulundi town, police are very much visible even on the road leading up to Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi's home in Mahlabathini. In fact, as I speak to you, I'm seeing a number of those police vehicles now making their way into the mortuary where the body is being kept. And as I do that, of course, the hundreds of IFP supporters who have gathered here, continue to sing, they continue to chant slogans to honor the life and times of the former IFP founder, that's Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. The statement that was issued, Unati, if I can just quote perhaps one paragraph for our viewers, from the Net Joint, says that mourners who will be attending the funeral service are urged to conduct themselves in an orderly and responsible manner. Attendees are also encouraged to cooperate with law enforcement officers and exercise patience. As I speak to you, Unati, there is a little bit of movement. You're seeing a group of Amabutho chanting slogans and singing songs. All this in honor, Unati, of the former IFP founder and former, IFP President Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who, by the way, was also Inkosi of the Buthelezi clan after he was appointed at just the age of 29, having served both the Buthelezi clan as well as the AmaZulu nation, for over, 7 decades, Unati.
All right, Simpiwe, thank you so much for that. Let's leave it there for now. Simpiwe Makanya outside the mortuary there in Ulundi. Of course, we will take you to him as soon as we start seeing movement happening back there again. But let's continue our conversation now. We are joined by political analyst Fikile Vilakazi. Ma'am, we are talking about a man with a very complex history. And as we also started talking about the difficulty of reconciling the life and times of Prince Prince Buthelezi. But let's just now talk about his role in the democratic South Africa. Of course, he led the Inkatha Freedom Party for 44 years, since its formation officially in 1975. But with the advent of democracy, he served as Home Affairs Minister in President Nelson Mandela's government after 94. He occupied the position until 2004 under President Thabo Mbeki then. And of course, we know that the former President Thabo Mbeki will be attending his funeral. Just the significance of what we have been hearing from political parties and the various statements in terms of who the prince was and what legacy he leaves behind.
Yes, Unati. I mean, we are talking about the eldest member of the South African Parliament. Also, I think that is important to point out, and it becomes significant in that sense because he is a political leader that has sort of lived almost between two different centuries of the National Democratic Revolution in South Africa and its imagination, from the time of the liberation struggle during apartheid. So he becomes that significant leader. At the same time, he is the kind of a leader that is negotiating the existence and the continuation of the monarchy, within the architecture of a democratic dispensation at a time when we have seen the demise of monarchies in various parts of the world, various parts of the African continent, and of course, probably Eswatini being one of the sort of resilient and remaining monarchies, on the African continent. So he is one of those people within South Africa that has been able to center and lead the negotiation of the coexistence of some kind of traditional leadership within the institution that you call democracy. And in that doing, of course, there are a number of issues that emerge from our democracy from the past of colonization. One is the question of land, which is centered within the conversation of Ngonyama Trust, and he leads that conversation to a point where we are seeing traditional leadership being included in the Constitution. I think Chapter 7 and Chapter 12 of our Constitution, if I'm not mistaken, speak to the question of traditional leadership because of his leadership and how the whole system of oppression around colonization, the movement of our ancestors and ancestresses from places really like Sophia Town, places like District 6, who were dispossessed of land. And he is one of the people that said it's not going to happen in KwaZulu-Natal. If you are going to enter this dispensation, we have to keep land for our people. But he does that in such a strategic way, which makes him, also to then be a contributor to the People's War and the loss of life in South Africa and the spillage of blood, because he does it in a manner that says, I can't negotiate this outside of the architecture of the apartheid system. If we cannot negotiate a full independence for the kingdom of KwaZulu-Natal, because we need the resources that come from the state. If we are going to negotiate ourselves out of that arrangement, it means then that we are likely to see suffering and destitution for our people. So he strategically stayed within, and in that staying, he benefited from the resources of the apartheid arrangement. And that is how he earns a reputation that says he is sleeping in the same bed with the apartheid government. And that is how also he enjoys actually support from the apartheid government in the story that we've been telling around the Bulpatong massacre, around the killings that we've seen in the various hostels, in the various townships of Soweto, Katlehong, Vosloorus, and so on. So he brings that memory to us, right? And within government, then this contestation continues itself under the presidency of former President Thabo Mbeki, under the presidency of former President Nelson Mandela, even as we are emerging into the presidency of former President Jacob Zuma. These conversations they're continuing themselves to say, how do we then reconcile this rift? Especially because at the center of the heart of this rift, actually was the continuation, the intention was the continuation of the struggle for national democratic revolution, but something went wrong in the negotiations since 1979 of that project. And since then, I think both political parties then have been at loggerheads, and that compromised even the negotiation. And when I look back now, in fact, I think this is what has also compromised the fact that the leaders who came back from exile and those who stayed here, including Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, were then not able to have a conversation with the black majority in terms of how do we then forge this project of reconciliation and healing. A gaping one was left unattended, which is this gap of the woundedness and the killings and the dying of people in the hands of the People's War.
And
and that's the image, unfortunately, that he carries with him up to the grave. And like I'm saying, Onati, the ANC is here. The Inkatha is still here. These conversations have been opened up. We can only really continue them in a way that exacerbates the project of healing.
And I mean, that's one of the things that he maintained, that he would have liked to see or find reconciliation between the IFP and the ANC, in his lifetime. Unfortunately, that wasn't achieved. I mean, of course, this is a man who was a member of the ANC Youth League at some point in time before he severed all ties with the ANC. Also citing, of course, significant people within the party that played a significant role in his life. Citing, of course, Albert Lutuli, also talking about a lot about Oliver Tambo and his influence in his life. And of course, we won't forget, during the volatile time, especially late 70s into the early 80s, where meetings were happening, meetings of reconciliation, that famous one in 1979 in London, where he essentially walked out of. So there's a lot of things, as you say, in terms of, reconciliation. But let's park our conversation here now.